My name is Marcus Thompson, and at 55 years old, I thought I understood what family meant. I thought I knew what respect looked like. But sometimes life has a way of teaching you lessons when you least expect them, and sometimes those lessons come from the people closest to your heart. It was a crisp October morning in Denver, Colorado, when I first realized that my relationship with my daughter Sarah had shifted into something I didn't recognize. The autumn leaves were painting the city in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, and I was standing in my home office, looking out at the construction site that would soon become the newest addition to Thompson Development Group. My life's work. You see, I didn't start with much. 30 years ago, I was a 25-year-old kid from the wrong side of Aurora, working construction jobs during the day and taking night classes in business management. My hands were calloused, my back ached constantly, and my bank account rarely had more than a few $100s. But I had something that money couldn't buy, a vision and an unshakable determination to build something that would last. The first property I ever developed was a small duplex on the outskirts of Denver. I scraped together every penny I had, took out loans that scared me to sleep at night, and worked 18-hour days to make it happen. When Sarah was born 2 years later, I remember holding her tiny hand and promising her that I would build an empire that would give her every opportunity I never had. My wife, Linda, was my partner in every sense of the word during those early years. While I was out negotiating deals and overseeing construction, she was managing our finances, raising Sarah, and keeping our family grounded. We lived modestly, reinvesting every profit back into the business. Our first home was a small 2-bedroom ranch that needed more repairs than I care to remember, but it was ours, and it represented the beginning of something bigger. As the years passed, Thompson Development Group grew from that single duplex into a portfolio of residential and commercial properties across the Denver metropolitan area. We specialized in affordable housing and community development, projects that revitalized neighborhoods and provided homes for working families. It wasn't the most glamorous work, but it was honest, and it made a difference in people's lives. Sarah grew up on construction sites. I'd bring her with me on weekends, and she'd wear her little hard hat and carry around a toy hammer, pretending to help with the work. She understood even as a child that every building we created represented months of planning, negotiation, and hard work. She saw the pride in my eyes when we'd drive past a completed project, and she'd point and say, "Daddy built that." But somewhere along the way, things changed. Maybe it was when Sarah went off to college at the University of Colorado Boulder. Maybe it was when she started spending more time with her boyfriend Jake, whose father owned a tech startup and seemed to measure success only in terms of innovation and disruption. Or maybe it was simply the natural progression of a young adult finding her own identity and questioning everything her parents represented. By the time Sarah graduated with her degree in marketing, Thompson Development Group had become one of the most respected development companies in Colorado. We employed over 200 people, had completed projects worth more than $50 million, and had earned recognition from the city for our commitment to sustainable and community-focused development. But to Sarah, it seemed none of that mattered anymore. The signs were subtle at first. She'd make offhand comments about old-fashioned business models or suggest that real estate development was not exactly innovative. When I'd invite her to company events or project unveilings, she'd find excuses to be elsewhere. She started working for a digital marketing agency downtown, and suddenly our conversations became strained, filled with awkward pauses and polite but distant exchanges. The breaking point came 3 months before my 55th birthday. Linda and I had invited Sarah and Jake over for Sunday dinner, a tradition we'd maintained for years despite Sarah's increasingly busy schedule. I was excited to share the news about our latest project, a mixed-use development that would include affordable housing units, retail space, and a community center in a neighborhood that desperately needed revitalization. The afternoon was particularly meaningful to me because I had just received confirmation that morning that we'd won the bid for the project. It represented everything Thompson Development Group had worked toward: a chance to transform an entire neighborhood while maintaining affordability and community character. The project would take 3 years to complete and would be the largest undertaking of my career. As I spread the architectural plans across the dining room table, my enthusiasm bubbling over as I explained the innovative design features and the positive impact it would have on the community, I noticed Sarah's expression. She wasn't engaged or interested. She was looking at her phone, occasionally glancing up with what I can only describe as thinly veiled impatience. The plans were beautiful, detailed blueprints that represented months of collaboration with architects, city planners, and community leaders. I pointed out the energy-efficient design elements, the wheelchair accessibility features that exceeded code requirements, and the shared green spaces that would encourage interaction among residents. "Look at this," I said, tracing my finger along the design for the central courtyard. "We're including a playground here, but also seating areas for older residents and raised garden beds where families can grow their own vegetables. The retail spaces are designed with larger windows and lower rent to encourage local entrepreneurs." Jake made a few polite comments about the sustainability features, but I could tell his attention was divided between the plans and his phone. Sarah, meanwhile, had barely looked up from her device since I'd started talking. What hurt most was the contrast with how she used to respond to my work. When she was in high school, she would spend hours asking questions about my projects, understanding the challenges and celebrating the successes. She'd even written her senior English paper on urban development and its impact on communities, interviewing me extensively and expressing genuine pride in the work our company was doing. Now, at 27, with her marketing degree and her sophisticated social circle, she seemed to view my excitement about construction projects as embarrassing, a reminder of her blue-collar roots that she'd rather forget. "The community center component is really the heart of the project," I continued, hoping to capture her interest with the programming aspects that I thought might appeal to her marketing background. "We're planning partnerships with the library system for literacy programs, with the community college for job training workshops, and with local healthcare providers for wellness programs." Linda was listening intently, asking thoughtful questions about the timeline and the community engagement process. She understood that this project represented not just a business opportunity, but a chance to put our values into practice on a larger scale than ever before. "How many families will this house?" Linda asked, studying the residential portion of the plans. 68 family units, I replied, ranging from 1-bedroom apartments for singles and couples to 3-bedroom units for larger families. We're also including 4 townhome-style units that will be affordable home ownership opportunities. I pulled out a separate sheet showing the income qualifications and rent structures we'd proposed. The goal is to serve families earning between 30 and 80% of the area median income. These are teachers, nurses, firefighters, restaurant workers, people who are essential to our community, but who have been priced out of much of the Denver housing market. This was the part of development work that had always excited me most. The math of making good housing affordable, the puzzle of balancing quality construction with accessible pricing, the challenge of creating profitable projects that still served a social good. "We've also committed to hiring locally for the construction work," I added. "At least 60% of the jobs will go to workers who live within a 5-mile radius of the project site. That means the money we spend on construction stays in the community and supports local families." Sarah finally looked up from her phone, but not with the interest I'd hoped for. Instead, she wore an expression of barely concealed frustration. "Dad, do you really need to go through every single detail?" she asked, her tone sharp with irritation. "We get it. You're building apartments. That's great." The dismissiveness in her voice stung, but I tried to maintain my enthusiasm. "Sarah, this isn't just about apartments. This is about creating a place where people can build better lives. The retail spaces will create jobs and provide services that the neighborhood needs. The community center will offer programs for kids and seniors and job training for adults. It's still just real estate development," she replied, returning her attention to her phone. I mean, I'm happy that you're excited about it, but it's not exactly revolutionary. Revolutionary. The word echoed in my mind as I looked at the plans spread across the table. Maybe what we were doing wasn't revolutionary in the Silicon Valley sense that Sarah's generation seemed to value so highly, but it was transformative in ways that mattered to real people living real lives. I thought about the families who would call this development home, about the children who would play in the courtyard and attend programs at the community center, about the elderly residents who would have safe, affordable housing and opportunities for social connection. Maybe it wasn't revolutionary, but it was meaningful. Jake looked up from his phone and made an effort to engage. The sustainability features are pretty cool, Mr. Thompson. Are you going for LEED certification? We're aiming for LEED Gold, I replied, grateful for his interest, even though I suspected it was motivated more by politeness than genuine curiosity. Solar panels on all the rooftops, energy-efficient appliances throughout, and a rainwater collection system for landscape irrigation. That's forward-thinking, Jake said. My dad's always talking about how the construction industry is slow to adopt green technologies. This was exactly the kind of perspective that frustrated me about my daughter's generation. They seemed to think that innovation only counted if it involved cutting-edge technology or disruptive business models. The idea that innovation could mean finding better ways to solve old problems, like how to house families affordably while building strong communities, didn't seem to register as valuable. The green technologies are important, I agreed, but they're just one part of what makes this project special. The real innovation is in the community programming and the way we're integrating housing, retail, and community services in a walkable, human-scale environment. As I spread the architectural plans across the dining room table, my enthusiasm bubbling over as I explained the innovative design features and the positive impact it would have on the community, I noticed Sarah's expression. She wasn't engaged or interested. She was looking at her phone, occasionally glancing up with what I can only describe as thinly veiled impatience. This is going to be our biggest project yet, I said, pointing to the detailed renderings. 68 family units, all with energy-efficient appliances and modern amenities, plus ground floor retail that will bring jobs and services to the area. The community center will have after-school programs, senior activities, and meeting spaces for local organizations. But as I continued explaining the project, sharing details about the innovative financing structure that would keep units affordable for decades rather than just the initial lease term, I could feel Sarah's attention drifting further away. She was scrolling through social media, occasionally showing Jake something on her screen, barely acknowledging the work that represented the culmination of my 30-year career. The financing structure alone had taken 18 months to develop, working with city housing authorities, community development financial institutions, and impact investors to create a model that could be replicated in other neighborhoods. We'd had to navigate complex regulations, community input processes, and environmental reviews. Every detail had been carefully planned to ensure that the development would truly serve the community's needs, rather than simply maximizing profit. I pulled out a folder of letters from community members who had participated in the planning process. "Listen to this," I said, hoping to capture Sarah's attention with the human impact of our work. "This is from Rosa Martinez, who lives in the neighborhood where we're building. She writes, 'For the first time in 20 years, I have hoped that my grandchildren might be able to afford to live in the community where they grew up.'" Sarah glanced up briefly, but her expression remained unchanged. "That's nice, Dad," she said, in the tone one might use to acknowledge a child's drawing. Nice. As if the hopes and dreams of working families were merely nice. As if the opportunity to keep communities intact across generations was a pleasant afterthought rather than a fundamental social good. I tried a different approach, thinking that perhaps the business aspects would engage her marketing-trained mind. The retail component is particularly innovative, I said, pulling out renderings of the commercial spaces. Instead of courting chain stores, we're actively recruiting local entrepreneurs and providing below-market rents for the first 2 years to help them establish their businesses. This wasn't just good community development, it was smart business. Local businesses were more likely to understand and serve the needs of neighborhood residents, more likely to hire locally, and more likely to reinvest their profits in the community. Chain stores might provide convenience, but they rarely provided the character and community connection that made neighborhoods thrive. We're also including a small business incubator space, I continued, where entrepreneurs can access shared resources like commercial kitchens, meeting rooms, and business mentoring services. The goal is to create an ecosystem that supports local economic development. Jake looked up from his phone and nodded politely. That's cool, Mr. Thompson. Very, traditional. Traditional. The word stung more than it should have, but it was Sarah's reaction that really cut deep. She sighed, not even trying to hide her boredom, and said, "Dad, can we please talk about something else? Not everything has to be about your buildings. My buildings." As if the life's work that had provided her with every advantage, every opportunity, every comfort she'd ever known was somehow beneath discussion. As if the career that had paid for her college education, her car, her apartment deposit when she first moved out, was an inconvenience to her sophisticated sensibilities. The phrase hung in the air like a slap. Not our family's work or the company you built or even your career. My buildings. As if 3 decades of community development, job creation and housing provision was nothing more than a personal hobby that I was boring everyone with. I looked around the table at Linda, who had gone pale with shock, and at Jake, who was suddenly very interested in his phone screen. The architectural plans, which moments before had represented exciting possibilities and positive community impact, now felt like evidence of my own irrelevance. My buildings, I repeated quietly, testing the words. Is that really how you see what I do, Sarah? As some kind of vanity project? Sarah had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, but she didn't back down. I just think you take it too seriously, Dad. It's a job. You develop properties. That's fine, but you don't need to act like you're changing the world or something. Changing the world. Perhaps that was naive of me, but wasn't improving people's lives, even in small ways, worth taking seriously? Wasn't providing affordable housing in a city where working families were being priced out a form of positive change? Wasn't creating spaces where communities could gather and children could learn and entrepreneurs could build businesses a contribution to the world, even if it wasn't as flashy as launching a tech startup? Linda finally found her voice. Sarah, that's enough. Your father has worked incredibly hard to build something meaningful, and he deserves your respect, even if you don't share his interests. But Sarah wasn't finished. Mom, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm just saying that Dad acts like building apartments is the most important thing in the world, when really it's just construction work. It's fine work, but it's not exactly innovative or groundbreaking. Construction work. Spoken with the same tone someone might use to describe cleaning sewers or hauling garbage, as if providing safe, affordable housing for families was manual labor rather than a complex intersection of finance, design, community planning, and social impact. I felt something crack inside my chest, a fissure that had been growing for months as I watched my daughter drift away from everything I valued and everything I'd worked to achieve. This wasn't just about her dismissing my career. It was about her dismissing the values that had shaped our family, the work ethic that had made her education and opportunities possible, the commitment to community service that Linda and I had tried to instill in her from childhood. You're right, I said finally, carefully folding up the architectural plans. It is just construction work, and these are just my buildings. I apologize for boring you with the details. The rest of the dinner passed in uncomfortable silence, with Linda making valiant attempts at conversation, while Sarah and Jake exchanged glances and checked their phones. When they left, Sarah gave me a perfunctory hug and said she'd see me soon, but we both knew that soon would probably be months away. That night, lying in bed next to Linda, I found myself questioning everything. Had I failed as a father? Had I been so focused on building a business that I'd forgotten to build a relationship with my daughter? Or was this simply the price of success, that the very achievements I was most proud of had somehow created a distance between us that I didn't know how to bridge? "She's just finding her own way," Linda whispered in the darkness, as if reading my thoughts. "She'll come around." But as the weeks turned into months, and as Sarah's attitude toward my work became increasingly dismissive, I began to wonder if Linda was right. My daughter seemed determined to establish her independence by rejecting everything I represented, and I didn't know how to respond without pushing her even further away. Linda shot Sarah a warning look, but the damage was done. I folded up the plans, excused myself from the table, and spent the rest of the evening in my study, wondering when my daughter had become a stranger. That night, lying in bed next to Linda, I found myself questioning everything. Had I failed as a father? Had I been so focused on building a business that I'd forgotten to build a relationship with my daughter? Or was this simply the price of success, that the very achievements I was most proud of had somehow created a distance between us that I didn't know how to bridge? "She's just finding her own way," Linda whispered in the darkness, as if reading my thoughts. "She'll come around." But as the weeks turned into months, and as Sarah's attitude toward my work became increasingly dismissive, I began to wonder if Linda was right. My daughter seemed determined to establish her independence by rejecting everything I represented, and I didn't know how to respond without pushing her even further away. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had built an empire with the intention of securing my family's future, but in doing so, I had somehow lost my connection to the person who mattered most. The buildings that stood as monuments to my hard work and determination had become, in Sarah's eyes, symbols of an outdated way of thinking, relics of a generation that she was eager to move beyond. As my 55th birthday approached, Linda suggested we have a small celebration. "Nothing fancy," she said. "Just family and a few close friends. Maybe it will be a good opportunity for you and Sarah to reconnect." I agreed, though part of me dreaded the thought of another awkward evening filled with forced conversation and barely concealed tension. But Linda was right. Family was family, and birthdays were supposed to be about celebrating the people we love, not dwelling on the disappointments that divide us. I had no idea that this birthday would become the catalyst for a conversation that would change everything between Sarah and me. I had no idea that her words would force me to confront not just our relationship, but the very legacy I thought I was building. And I certainly had no idea that sometimes the most painful moments in our lives are actually the doorways to the most important truths we'll ever learn. As I look back now, I realize that everything that happened next, the hurt, the anger, the revelation, and ultimately the healing, began with my decision to open my heart to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, my daughter and I still had something worth fighting for. The morning of my 55th birthday dawned grey and overcast, typical for late October in Denver. There was a bite in the air that promised snow in the coming weeks, and as I stood at my bedroom window with my first cup of coffee, I watched the last stubborn leaves clinging to the oak tree in our backyard. Linda was still sleeping, and the house was quiet in that peaceful way that only early mornings can provide. I had mixed feelings about the day ahead. On one hand, Linda had put a lot of effort into planning what she called a meaningful celebration, a dinner party with our closest friends and family. On the other hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that it would be another evening of stilted conversation with Sarah, another reminder of how far apart we'd grown, By noon, Linda was in full preparation mode, transforming our dining room into something that looked like it belonged in a magazine. She'd always had an eye for detail, and despite my protests that we didn't need to make a big fuss, I had to admit she'd created something beautiful. The table was set with her grandmother's china, candles flickered in crystal holders, and the aroma of her famous pot roast filled the house. "Marcus, you need to get dressed," she called from the kitchen as I wandered in to steal a piece of bread from the basket she was preparing. "People will start arriving in an hour." No, the guest list was small but significant. My business partner David and his wife Carol, Linda's sister Margaret and her husband Tom, our longtime family friends the Johnsons, and of course, Sarah and Jake. 8 people who had been part of our lives in various ways, gathering to mark another year of my existence on this planet. David arrived first, as he always did. He'd been my partner for over 15 years, joining Thompson Development Group when we were still a relatively small operation. Where I was the visionary and the face of the company, David was the analytical mind who made sure our dreams were grounded in financial reality. He understood better than anyone the blood, sweat, and sleepless nights that had gone into building what we had. "Happy birthday, old man," he said, clapping me on the shoulder as he handed me a bottle of bourbon. 25 years aged, just like our friendship. The other guests arrived in quick succession, filling our home with laughter and conversation. Margaret regaled everyone with stories about Linda's cooking disasters from their childhood. Tom debated the Broncos' chances this season with David, and Carol showed Linda photos from their recent trip to Italy. It was the kind of warm, comfortable gathering that reminded me why I loved having people in our home. Sarah and Jake were the last to arrive, and I noticed immediately that something was different about Sarah's demeanor. She seemed tense, almost agitated, and barely made eye contact with me as she wished me a perfunctory happy birthday. Jake was his usual polite but distant self, engaging in small talk, but clearly checking his phone whenever he thought no one was looking. During dinner, the conversation flowed easily among the other guests. David told the story of our first major project, a commercial complex that had nearly bankrupted us when the primary tenant pulled out at the last minute, and how we'd managed to turn disaster into opportunity by pivoting to a mixed-use design that became one of our most successful properties. "Marcus has always had this ability to see potential where others see problems," David said, raising his glass. "That's what makes him not just a good businessman, but a true community builder." I felt a flush of pride at his words, but I noticed Sarah rolling her eyes. It was a small gesture, probably unnoticed by the others, but it hit me like a physical blow. Here was my business partner, my friend of 15 years, recognizing the work we'd done together, and my own daughter couldn't even pretend to be interested. The breaking point came during dessert. Linda had made my favorite chocolate cake, and as she brought it out, with 55 candles blazing, everyone began singing happy birthday. I made my wish, foolishly hoping for a better relationship with Sarah, and blew out the candles to applause and good-natured jokes about my advancing age. "So, Marcus," Tom said as Linda served the cake, "what's next for Thompson Development? Any exciting projects on the horizon?" It was an innocent question, the kind of thing people ask when they're genuinely interested in your work. I started to tell them about the mixed-use project I'd tried to share with Sarah months earlier, the one that had met with such indifference. But as I described the community impact, the innovative design features, and the partnerships we'd formed with local organizations, I could see Sarah's patience wearing thin. "The really exciting part," I said, warming to my subject, "is that this project represents everything we've learned about sustainable community development over the past 30 years. We're not just building housing, we're creating a space where families can thrive, where local businesses can flourish, and where the community can come together." That's when Sarah couldn't contain herself any longer. "Dad, honestly, no one cares what you built," she said, her voice sharp with frustration. "You act like these buildings are some kind of monument to your greatness, but they're just buildings. It's construction work. It's not exactly changing the world. The room fell silent. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the sound of my own heart beating too fast. Every eye was on Sarah, then on me, waiting to see how I would respond to this public humiliation on my own birthday. Linda's face had gone pale. David looked like he'd been slapped. Carol was staring at her cake as if it held the secrets of the universe. Margaret and Tom exchanged uncomfortable glances, and Jake seemed to be studying his phone with sudden, intense interest. But it was the look on Sarah's face that really got to me. There wasn't malice there exactly, but there was a dismissiveness, a casual cruelty that suggested she genuinely believed what she'd said. In her mind, my life's work was nothing more than moving dirt and stacking bricks. The career that had defined me, supported our family, and employed hundreds of people was, to her, utterly insignificant. I felt anger rising in my chest, hot and immediate. This was my daughter, the child I'd worked so hard to provide for, telling me and our closest friends that my achievements were meaningless. This was the young woman whose college education, whose car, whose very lifestyle had been built on the foundation of the just buildings she was so quick to dismiss. But as I looked around the table at the shocked faces of people who had watched me build Thompson Development Group from nothing, who had seen the positive impact our work had on communities throughout Denver, I realized that this wasn't just about Sarah's disrespect. This was about something deeper, a fundamental misunderstanding about what I'd built and why it mattered. "Is that really what you think?" I asked her, my voice steady despite the turmoil I felt inside. "That what I've spent 30 years building doesn't matter?" Sarah's jaw set stubbornly. "I think you take it too seriously, Dad. It's a job. You develop properties, that's it. You don't need to act like you're some kind of visionary." The words hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. I looked at my daughter, this intelligent, educated young woman who had benefited from every sacrifice I'd made, and realized that she had no idea who I really was or what I'd actually accomplished. She saw buildings where I saw dreams realized. She saw construction where I saw communities transformed. She saw an old-fashioned businessman where I saw a man who had built something meaningful from nothing. "You're right," I said finally, setting down my fork and looking directly at Sarah. "I do take it seriously, and maybe it's time you understood why." The room was still silent, but now there was an expectancy in the air, as if everyone sensed that something important was about to happen. Linda reached over and touched my hand, a gesture of support that gave me the courage to continue. "You know what, Sarah? You're absolutely right that no one here probably cares about the technical details of what I've built. But I think they might care about something else, about what those buildings actually represent and what they've made possible." I stood up from the table, my decision made. If my daughter wanted to dismiss my life's work as meaningless, then she deserved to understand exactly what she was dismissing. If she thought that building communities was just construction work, then it was time for her to learn what real construction work looked like and what it had cost to get where we were today. "If you'll all excuse me for a moment," I said, "I have something I'd like to show everyone, something that I think will put tonight's conversation into perspective." As I walked toward my study, I could hear whispered conversations starting up behind me, but I didn't look back. I had spent 30 years building something I was proud of, and if my own daughter couldn't see the value in that work, then perhaps it was time for a more direct approach to education. In my study, I pulled out a file I hadn't opened in years, a collection of photographs, documents, and mementos from the early days of Thompson Development Group. But more importantly, I pulled out something else. The keys to my first property, the duplex that had started it all, and the deed that proved I still owned it. It was time for Sarah to understand that the buildings she dismissed so casually weren't just my legacy, they were hers as well. And if she wanted to know what I'd built, then I was going to show her, starting with the foundation of everything. When I returned to the dining room, I was carrying a manila folder and an old, worn set of keys that jingled softly as I walked. The conversation died immediately as I took my place at the head of the table, and I could feel the weight of everyone's attention focused on me. "Sarah," I said, my voice calm but firm, "you said that no one cares what I built and that it's just construction work. I'd like to challenge that assumption if you don't mind." I opened the folder and pulled out a faded photograph, placing it in the center of the table where everyone could see it. It showed a young man in work clothes and a hard hat, standing in front of a rundown duplex that looked like it was one strong wind away from collapse. This is me, 30 years ago, standing in front of 1247 Maple Street in Aurora. I was 25 years old, I had $800 in my bank account, and I had just signed the most terrifying document of my life, a mortgage for this property that cost me $12,000. I could see Sarah leaning forward slightly, her attention caught despite herself. The other guests were studying the photograph with interest, seeing a side of me that most of them had never known. "That building was my first development project," I continued, pulling out more photographs that showed the property in various stages of renovation. It had been condemned by the city, the plumbing didn't work, half the windows were broken, and there were holes in the roof that you could see the sky through. But I saw something that others didn't. I saw potential. David was smiling now, remembering stories I'd told him about those early days. Linda squeezed my hand under the table, encouraging me to continue. "I spent 6 months working on that duplex, mostly by myself because I couldn't afford to hire help. I learned plumbing from YouTube videos and library books. I taught myself electrical work from manuals I checked out for free. I worked construction jobs during the day to pay for materials, and I worked on the duplex at night and on weekends." I pulled out a receipt, yellowed with age, and placed it next to the photographs. "This is from Home Depot, $43.16 for drywall, compound, and sandpaper. I remember that purchase because it represented almost my entire food budget for that week. I lived on ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches for months because every penny went into this project." Sarah was staring at the receipt, and I could see something shifting in her expression. This wasn't the comfortable narrative of success she was used to hearing. This was the raw, unglamorous reality of how that success had actually been built. When I finally finished the renovation and found tenants for both units, "Do you know what my profit was for that first year?" I asked, looking directly at Sarah. "$-200. I lost money, but I had proven something to myself, that I could take something broken and make it whole again." I pulled out more documents from the folder. Loan applications, building permits, inspection reports, all bearing my signature and dates from 3 decades ago. The second property was a small apartment building on Federal Boulevard, 4 units, all occupied by people who couldn't afford to live anywhere else. I charged below market rent because I believed that everyone deserved a safe, clean place to live. I spent my own money to install new locks, to fix the heating system, to make sure those families had a home they could be proud of. Margaret was looking at the documents with fascination. "Marcus, I had no idea you started so small. I remember when you and Linda bought your first real house, but I never knew about all this." "Most people don't," I said, "because it's not glamorous work. It's not innovative or disruptive or any of the other words that get thrown around these days. It's just the slow, methodical process of building something meaningful, one project at a time." I reached into the folder again and pulled out a letter, handwritten on notebook paper. "This is from Maria Gonzalez, a single mother who lived in that apartment on Federal Boulevard. She wrote this to thank me for fixing the broken window in her daughter's bedroom before winter set in. She said it was the first time in years that her daughter felt safe sleeping in her own bed." I passed the letter around the table, watching as each person read Maria's words of gratitude. When it reached Sarah, she read it twice, her face growing thoughtful. "Over the next 15 years, I continued, I bought, renovated, and managed 37 properties throughout the Denver metro area. Not because I wanted to get rich, though eventually the business did become profitable, but because I had discovered my calling. I was in the business of creating homes, of building communities. of giving families a foundation they could build their lives on. I pulled out a newspaper clipping from 2010, showing a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a community center we'd built in conjunction with a residential development. This project took 3 years to complete. We worked with city planners, community organizations, and local residents to design something that would meet the neighborhood's actual needs. The community center has after-school programs, senior activities, job training workshops, and meeting spaces for local groups. David nodded, remembering the project. That was the one where Marcus insisted on including the childcare facility, even though it meant lower profits. He said any working parent deserved access to quality, affordable childcare. Because it was the right thing to do, I said simply. We weren't just building housing, we were building a place where families could thrive. I could see Sarah processing this information, seeing her father's work through a different lens, but I wasn't finished yet. Sarah, you said that no one cares what I built. Let me tell you who cares. I pulled out a thick folder of letters, emails, and cards. The Martinez family, who bought their first home from us after years of living in a one-bedroom apartment with 3 children. The Johnsons, different Johnsons from our friends here, who started a small business in one of our retail spaces and now employ 12 people. The Williams family, whose son graduated from high school thanks to the tutoring programs at our community center. I spread some of the letters across the table, testimonials from families whose lives had been changed by our work. These people care, Sarah. They care because what we built gave them opportunities they never would have had otherwise. Jake was reading one of the letters, and I saw him look up with surprise. Mr. Thompson, this family says you personally helped them navigate the home buying process when other developers wouldn't work with them because of their credit history. Because everyone deserves a chance, I said. My job isn't just to develop properties, it's to build communities where people can succeed. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old keys I'd brought from my study, placing them on the table with a soft clink. These are the keys to that first duplex on Maple Street. I still own it, 30 years later. The same family has lived in the upstairs unit for 12 years now. Mrs. Chen is a nurse at Presbyterian St. Joseph, and her husband teaches at the local elementary school. Their daughter just started college at CU Boulder, the same school you graduated from, Sarah. Sarah stared at the keys as if they held some kind of magic. You still own it? I own all of them, I said quietly. Every property I've ever developed, I've kept, because this was never about making a quick profit and moving on. This was about building something lasting, something that would continue to serve families and communities for generations. I pulled out the most recent addition to my folder, a financial statement that I'd never shared with anyone except Linda and my accountant. Thompson Development Group currently owns and manages 87 residential properties and 12 commercial properties throughout Colorado. We provide housing for over 400 families and commercial space for 63 small businesses. Those businesses employ over 800 people. The table was completely silent now. Even Jake had put away his phone, staring at the documents spread before us. So, when you say that no one cares what I built, I continued, looking directly at Sarah, you're talking about the 400 families who have a roof over their heads, the 63 business owners who have a place to pursue their dreams, and the 800 employees who have jobs because of the commercial spaces we created. Sarah's face had gone pale. Dad, I didn't know. You didn't know because you never asked, I said, not unkindly, but with unmistakable firmness. You made assumptions about what I do based on your own prejudices about construction and development work. You decided that because my work involves buildings and not algorithms, it must be less valuable, less important, less meaningful. I gathered up the photographs and documents, but left the keys on the table. Tomorrow is Saturday. If you really want to understand what I've built, I'll take you to see it. Not just the buildings, Sarah, but the communities, the families, the lives that have been changed because of this work that you think no one cares about. The room remained quiet for a long moment, Linda was wiping tears from her eyes, and I could see that several of our guests were similarly moved. David was nodding slowly, as if remembering his own reasons for joining me in this work all those years ago. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice small and uncertain. Would you really show me? I would be honored to show you, I said. But I need you to understand something first. This isn't about proving that I'm right and you're wrong. This is about helping you see that the work people do, whether it's developing properties or marketing digital products or teaching school or nursing patients back to health, all of it matters if it's done with purpose and integrity. I picked up the keys and held them out to her. These represent 30 years of my life, Sarah. 30 years of work that I'm proud of, work that has made a difference in people's lives, work that has built the foundation for everything our family has achieved. If you want to dismiss that as just construction work, that's your choice. But you owe it to yourself and to me to understand what you're dismissing before you do it. Sarah reached out slowly and took the keys, her fingers closing around them as if she was holding something precious and fragile. I'm sorry, Dad. I really didn't understand. I know you didn't, I said gently, but understanding is something we can build together, one conversation at a time, just like everything else worth having. As the evening wound down and our guests prepared to leave, I found myself feeling something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not because Sarah had apologized, though that meant a great deal, but because she had shown genuine curiosity about my work for the first time in years. The keys to that first duplex were still in her hand when she and Jake left that night, and as I watched them drive away, I realized that sometimes the most important construction project isn't a building at all. Sometimes it's rebuilding a relationship that you thought was beyond repair. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp, clear weather that makes Denver feel like the most beautiful city in the world. The sky was that particular shade of blue that only comes with high altitude and low humidity, and the mountains stood out against the horizon like a postcard. I was up early, nursing my coffee and reviewing the route I'd planned for Sarah's education and community development. Linda found me in the kitchen at 7:30, already dressed and clearly anxious about the day ahead. You don't have to prove anything to her, you know, she said, wrapping her arms around me from behind as I studied my notes. This isn't about proving anything, I replied, leaning back into her embrace. It's about sharing something. There's a difference. Sarah arrived promptly at 9, alone. Jake had to work, she explained, though I suspected that was probably for the best. This was a conversation that needed to happen between father and daughter, without the complications that additional perspectives might bring. She was dressed casually, jeans, sneakers, and a University of Colorado sweatshirt that reminded me of the young woman who used to wear her little hard hat around construction sites. But there was something different about her demeanor today. The defensive edge that had characterized our recent interactions was gone, replaced by what looked like genuine curiosity and perhaps a touch of nervousness. "So, where are we going first?" she asked as we climbed into my truck, a decision I'd made deliberately. I could have taken my sedan, but the truck was part of the story I wanted to tell, practical, reliable, built for work rather than show. "We're going to start at the beginning," I said, pulling out of our driveway and heading toward Aurora, the duplex on Maple Street. The drive took about 20 minutes, winding through neighborhoods that told their own stories about Denver's growth and change over the past 3 decades. Sarah was quiet for most of the journey, occasionally asking questions about the areas we passed through, but mostly just observing. When we pulled up in front of 1247 Maple Street, Sarah stared at the building with obvious surprise. It looked nothing like the rundown property in the photograph I'd shown her the night before. The duplex was well maintained, with fresh paint, a small but neat garden, and a general air of being cared for and lived in. "This is it?" she asked, comparing the building to the keys she was still carrying from the night before. "This is it," I confirmed, getting out of the truck. "But look closer." "What do you see?" Sarah walked around the building slowly, taking in details that she probably would never have noticed before our conversation. "The windows are new," she said, "and the siding, but the basic structure is the same as in your old picture." "Exactly. I've updated and maintained it over the years, but the bones of the building are the same ones I worked on 30 years ago." Good construction lasts, Sarah. When you build something right the first time, it can serve families for generations. As if on cue, the front door of the upstairs unit opened, and Mrs. Chen emerged with a bag of groceries. She was a small, energetic woman in her 50s, and her face lit up when she saw me. "Mr. Thompson," she called, waving enthusiastically. "How wonderful to see you." I introduced Sarah, explaining that she was my daughter and that I was showing her some of our properties. Mrs. Chen immediately invited us in for tea, and despite Sarah's obvious uncertainty about imposing on a stranger, we found ourselves sitting in a cozy living room that clearly belonged to a family that took pride in their home. "Your father is a good man," Mrs. Chen told Sarah as she served us green tea in delicate china cups. "When we first moved here, we had very little money and no credit history. Other landlords, they take one look and say no. But Mr. Thompson, he sat down with us. He listened to our story. He gave us a chance." She gestured around the apartment, which was small but immaculately maintained. "We have lived here 12 years now. My husband teaches at the elementary school 3 blocks away. I work at the hospital, and our daughter Amy is in her 2nd year at CU Boulder, studying engineering." Sarah's eyes widened. "She's at CU? That's where I went to school." "Yes, she wants to be a civil engineer, maybe work in construction like your father someday. She says she wants to build things that help families, just like Mr. Thompson does." I saw Sarah glance at me with a new expression, not the dismissive look I'd grown accustomed to, but something that might have been the beginning of respect. Mrs. Chen continued talking, telling Sarah about the neighborhood, about the sense of community that had developed among the residents of the various properties I owned in the area, about the way I'd helped other families navigate challenges and setbacks over the years. "Your father, he doesn't just collect rent and disappear," she explained. "When Mrs. Rodriguez downstairs lost her job 2 years ago, he worked with her to find a payment plan so she wouldn't lose her home. When the heating system broke in the middle of winter, he was here personally within 2 hours, and he didn't leave until everyone was warm again." When we left Mrs. Chen's apartment, Sarah was quiet, processing what she'd heard. But I could see the wheels turning in her mind, recalibrating her understanding of what property development actually meant in practice. Our next stop was the Federal Boulevard apartment building, where Maria Gonzalez had once lived. The building had been sold years ago, but I wanted Sarah to see the neighborhood and understand the context of those early projects. "This area was considered pretty rough when I first started working here," I explained, as we drove slowly through streets lined with small businesses, food trucks, and families walking to weekend activities. High crime, low property values, not a lot of investment from the city. But it was also full of hard-working families who just needed someone to believe in the neighborhood's potential. We parked and walked around the area, and I pointed out changes that had occurred over the years. New businesses, improved lighting, parks that had been renovated and expanded. "This transformation didn't happen overnight," I said. "It took years of small investments, of property owners who cared about more than just quick profits, of community members who refused to give up on their neighborhood." Sarah stopped in front of a small restaurant that advertised authentic Mexican food and handmade tortillas. "This looks like it's been here forever," she said. "Actually, it opened just 5 years ago," I replied. "The owner, Carlos Mendoza, used to work construction with me on some of my early projects. He saved every penny for 15 years to open this place. When he was looking for a location, I helped him find this space and worked with him on the lease terms so he could afford to get started." We went inside, and Carlos himself came out from the kitchen when he saw me. He was a stocky man with calloused hands and a smile that could light up a room, and he insisted on making us his specialty, street tacos that were, without exaggeration, the best I'd ever tasted. "Senor Thompson," Carlos said in accented but confident English, "this man, he changed my life. When I tell him I want to open restaurant, everyone say I'm crazy. Construction worker cannot be chef, they say, but he believe in me." As we ate, Carlos told Sarah about his journey from construction worker to restaurant owner, about the challenges of starting a small business, about the way the neighborhood had embraced his restaurant and made it a gathering place for families. "I employ 8 people now," Carlos said proudly. "My nephew, he works here after school and on weekends, saving money for college. Mrs. Patterson from down the street. She works part-time because her husband is sick and they need extra income. This restaurant, it's not just my dream, it's helping other people's dreams too." When we left the restaurant, Sarah was carrying a bag of Carlos's homemade salsa that he'd insisted she take home. "Dad," she said as we walked back to the truck, "I'm starting to understand something. When you develop properties, you're not just building buildings, you're building ecosystems." I smiled, pleased that she was beginning to see the bigger picture. "That's exactly right. Every property exists within a community, and every community is made up of interconnected relationships. When we develop responsibly, we strengthen those connections." Udi. As we drove to our next destination, Sarah began asking more detailed questions about the business side of community development. "How do you balance making a profit with keeping rents affordable?" she asked. It seems like those two goals would be in conflict. It was exactly the kind of question I'd hoped she would ask someday, the kind of conversation I'd imagined having with her when she was younger and more interested in my work. "It's challenging," I admitted, "but it's not impossible. The key is taking a long-term view instead of trying to maximize short-term returns. When you own properties for decades, instead of flipping them quickly, you can afford to charge below-market rents initially because you'll benefit from property appreciation over time." I explained how Thompson Development Group's business model was structured around long-term ownership and community stability rather than quick profits. We also work with community development financial institutions and government programs that provide low-interest loans and tax credits for affordable housing projects. It requires more paperwork and patience, but it makes projects financially viable that wouldn't work with conventional financing. Sarah was taking notes on her phone, something I hadn't seen her do during our conversations in years. "What about maintenance and repairs? Don't those costs add up over time?" "They do," I replied, "but that's where quality construction pays off. When you build things right the first time, using good materials and skilled labor, your long-term maintenance costs are much lower. It's more expensive up front, but it saves money and provides better living conditions for tenants over the life of the building." This led to a discussion about the difference between luxury developments that prioritized appearance over substance and affordable housing that focused on durability and functionality. Sarah was surprised to learn how much thought went into seemingly simple decisions like choosing flooring materials, kitchen appliances, and heating systems. "I never realized how many factors you have to consider," she said. "It's like you're an architect, a financier, a social worker, and a property manager all at once. Don't forget construction supervisor, code compliance expert, and community liaison," I added with a laugh. "The technical skills are important, but the relationship skills might be even more critical. You can't build successful communities without understanding what the people who live there actually need and want." Our next stop was the community center I'd shown in the newspaper clipping the night before. It was Saturday afternoon, and the building was bustling with activity. Through the windows, we could see children participating in an art class, teenagers playing basketball in the gymnasium, and seniors gathered around tables for what looked like a book discussion group. "This center serves about 1,500 families in the surrounding area," I explained as we walked through the facility. "The after-school programs provide safe, educational activities for kids whose parents work late. The senior programs combat isolation and provide health and wellness resources. The meeting rooms are used by community organizations, support groups, and local government meetings. Sarah was paying attention to details she would never have noticed before. The quality of the construction, the thoughtful layout that allowed for multiple activities without interference, the way the spaces had been designed to be both functional and welcoming. In the main lobby, we met Jennifer Walsh, the center's director, an energetic woman in her 30s who clearly loved her work. When I introduced Sarah, Jennifer immediately began telling her about the center's programs and their impact on the community. The most successful programs are the ones that bring different age groups together, Jennifer explained as she led us through the facility. We have a reading program where seniors volunteer to help elementary school kids with homework. The teenagers in our job training program provide technology help for older adults. It creates connections across generations. Sarah was fascinated by the intergenerational programming, asking Jennifer detailed questions about how they'd developed these initiatives and what outcomes they'd measured. I could see her marketing mind working, thinking about how to communicate the value of these programs to potential funders and community members. In the computer lab, we watched as a group of middle school students worked on coding projects while being mentored by high school volunteers. In another room, elderly residents were learning to use smartphones and social media to stay connected with distant family members. Your father's vision for this center was incredibly forward-thinking, Jennifer told Sarah. He insisted that it should serve the whole community, not just one demographic. That's why we have childcare for working parents, after-school programs for latchkey kids, job training for adults who need new skills, and social programs for seniors who might otherwise be isolated. As we walked through the building, Sarah was taking more notes, asking about funding sources, program outcomes, and community partnerships. She was approaching the center with the same analytical mindset she brought to her marketing work, but now she was applying that analysis to understand social impact rather than dismiss it. The teen employment program is particularly innovative, Jennifer continued, leading us to a workshop space where high school students were learning carpentry and electrical skills. We partner with local contractors to provide real-world experience, and many of our graduates go on to careers in the building trades or use these skills to start their own businesses. One of the students, a 17-year-old named Marcus, which made me smile, was working on building a bookshelf that would be donated to the children's reading room. When Jennifer introduced us, he eagerly explained what he was learning and how he hoped to use these skills after graduation. Mr. Thompson helped design this program, he told Sarah. He said young people should have opportunities to learn with their hands, not just from books and computers. I'm planning to study construction management in college and maybe start my own company someday. After we left the community center, Sarah was quiet for several minutes, processing what she'd seen. Finally, she said, "I'm beginning to understand something about legacy. It's not just about what you build, it's about what you enable other people to build." "Exactly," I replied. "The buildings are important, but they're really just the platform for everything else that happens. The relationships, the opportunities, the sense of community, that's what makes the work meaningful." Sarah looked out the window as we drove through the neighborhood surrounding the community center. "I can see the impact," she said. "The businesses, the families, the way people interact with each other. It's like you've created a positive feedback loop where good housing supports strong communities, which attract good businesses, which provide jobs for residents." It was the most sophisticated analysis of community development I'd ever heard her articulate, and I felt a surge of pride in her intelligence and her growing understanding of complex social systems. "That's the goal," I said. "But it takes time to develop, and it requires ongoing investment and attention. You can't just build something and walk away. You have to be committed to the long-term success of the community." This led to another discussion about the difference between extractive business models that took value out of communities and regenerative models that built value over time. Sarah was surprised to learn about the various ways that responsible developers could support local economic development, from hiring local contractors to partnering with community organizations to providing below-market retail space for essential services. It sounds like you're running a social enterprise as much as a real estate business, she observed. I prefer to think of it as running a real estate business with social values, I replied. The profit motive is important because it ensures sustainability, but profit shouldn't be the only motive. How do you fund all of this? Sarah asked Jennifer. It's a combination of sources, Jennifer replied. Some city funding, some grants, some private donations. But the key is that Mr. Thompson structured the original development so that a portion of the rental income from the residential units helps support the center's operations. It's sustainable because it's built into the economic model, not dependent on charity. When we left the community center, Sarah was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, I never thought about development as social engineering. It's not social engineering, I corrected gently. It's social responsibility. When you have the power to shape how communities develop, you have an obligation to think about the long-term impact of your decisions. Our final stop was our newest project, the mixed-use development that Sarah had dismissed so casually months earlier. The construction was about 70% complete, and I had arranged for us to meet with the project manager for a walkthrough. This project represents everything we've learned over 30 years, I explained as we put on hard hats and safety vests. Affordable housing that doesn't look or feel like affordable housing. Retail space designed specifically for local small businesses, community amenities that bring residents together, and environmental features that reduce long-term costs for families. As we walked through the construction site, I pointed out details that most people would never notice. The extra insulation that would keep heating costs low, the high-efficiency appliances that would reduce utility bills, the soundproofing between units that would ensure privacy and peace. Each apartment has its own washer and dryer connections, I explained, because I've learned that access to laundry facilities at home is a huge quality of life issue for families. The kitchens are designed with enough counter space and storage for people who cook real meals, not just microwave dinners. Sarah was asking more questions now, engaging with the technical and design aspects in a way she never had before. Why did you choose these particular retail tenants? She asked, looking at the commercial spaces on the ground floor. We prioritized local businesses and services that the community actually needs, I replied. A grocery store that stocks fresh produce and culturally relevant foods, a pharmacy, a childcare center, a branch of the credit union that many of our residents use. We're not just creating jobs, we're creating convenient access to essential services. As the afternoon wound down, we sat in my truck in the parking lot of the new development, looking out at the construction that would soon house 68 families. Sarah was holding the keys to the original duplex again, turning them over in her hands, as if they were a puzzle she was trying to solve. Dad, she said finally, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you understanding. I spent so long thinking that your work was old-fashioned because it wasn't about technology or innovation. But I was measuring success by the wrong standards. She looked out at the construction site where workers were installing windows and hanging drywall. What you've built isn't just about the buildings. It's about creating stable foundations for people's lives. It's about giving families the security they need to pursue their own dreams. I felt a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. The buildings matter, Sarah. Good construction, thoughtful design, quality materials, all of that matters because people deserve to live in spaces that are safe and comfortable and dignified. But you're right that it's about more than the physical structures. It's about legacy, she said quietly. Not just leaving something behind, but creating something that continues to make a positive impact long after you're gone. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the construction crews finish their work for the day. Finally, Sarah spoke again. "I've been thinking about something Mrs. Chen said, about her daughter wanting to be a civil engineer so she can build things that help families. That's not really different from what I do in marketing, is it? We're both trying to connect people with things that improve their lives." "Exactly," I said. "The tools are different, but the fundamental purpose is the same, using your skills to make a positive difference in people's lives." Sarah handed me back the keys to the duplex. "These belong to you," she said, "but I'd like to learn more about the business, if you're willing to teach me. Not because I want to change careers, but because I want to understand my family's legacy. I want to be able to talk intelligently about what we've built together." Manish! As we drove home that evening, I found myself thinking about the difference between building structures and building relationships. Both require patience, careful planning, quality materials, and ongoing maintenance. Both can last for generations if they're constructed with care and attention to detail. Most importantly, both require a foundation built on mutual respect and understanding, something that Sarah and I had finally begun to rebuild, one conversation at a time. That night at dinner, Linda listened as Sarah enthusiastically described everything she'd seen and learned during our day together. For the first time in months, my daughter talked about my work with genuine interest and respect, asking follow-up questions and making connections between my projects and her own understanding of community development. "I have an idea," Sarah said as we finished dessert. "What if we work together on the marketing for the new development? I could help you tell the story of what you're building in a way that connects with younger families, maybe create content that helps people understand the community impact of this kind of development." It was exactly the kind of collaboration I had dreamed of but never dared to ask for. "I would love that," I said, "but only if you're truly interested, not because you feel obligated." "I'm interested," she said firmly. "More than interested. I'm inspired. What you've shown me today, it's given me a new perspective on what it means to build something meaningful." As I look back now on that weekend, on the birthday dinner that almost destroyed our relationship, and the day of education that began to heal it, I realize that the most important thing I ever built wasn't a building at all. It was the bridge back to my daughter's respect and understanding. The keys to that first duplex still sit on my desk, a reminder of where everything started. But now they represent something more than just my first successful project. They represent the moment when Sarah finally understood that the work we do matters not because of its complexity or innovation, but because of its impact on the lives of real people. Thompson Development Group continues to grow and evolve, but now it does so with the involvement and enthusiasm of the next generation. Sarah brings fresh perspectives and new marketing strategies to our work, while I provide the experience and relationships that come from 30 years in the business. More importantly, we've learned to see each other clearly, not as the people we thought the other should be, but as the people we actually are. Sarah understands now that building communities is complex, meaningful work that requires vision, skill, and dedication. And I understand that my daughter's questioning of traditional approaches isn't disrespect. It's the same drive for excellence that has always motivated me, expressed in the language of her own generation. The buildings we construct will stand for decades, providing homes and opportunities for families we may never meet. But the relationship we've rebuilt will last even longer, creating a legacy of understanding and mutual respect that extends far beyond any physical structure. Sometimes the most important foundations we lay aren't made of concrete and steel. Sometimes they're made of honest conversation, genuine curiosity, and the willingness to see familiar things through new eyes. And sometimes the most valuable thing we can build together isn't a building at all, It's a bridge between generations, constructed one honest conversation at a time.